Hello and welcome to SpyHards podcast. I am Agent Scott,
And I'm Cam the Provocateur.
and we are back with another SpyMaster interview. A bit of a treat for you, and a bit of a sequel to an episode we did just last year on the film Spy Game. Cam, who do we have joining us?
Yes, we are being joined by Michael Frost Beckner, who wrote, as you said, Scott, the movie Spy Game. And I felt like this was a good time to release this interview. With last week, we talked about Ridley Scott and Body of Lies. Now we can talk a little bit more about Tony Scott and Spy Game.
And I'm, of course, Agent Scott. So we have all of the Scotts represented this week.
I feel so left out.
Yes, and so you should. But yeah, without further ado, let's throw to the interview Mr. Michael Frost Beckner himself. Cam, roll it. And joining us now on the show, our second time looking at Operation Dinner Out, it is the screenwriter of the fantastic film Spy Game. It is Mr. Michael Frost Beckner. Hello, sir. How are you doing?
I'm doing just great. Thank you for having me, and thank you for doing this film twice. It's quite an honor. I like your show quite a bit.
Well, that's the honor, really. That's very nice of you to say. And it's always a treat to speak to people who actually make the films that we sit and talk about every week, because we love them so much to sit around talking about them. But you're the ones who actually make it happen, so it's always a pleasure.
Oh, well, thank you. It's been quite a nice run in Hollywood for me. I've enjoyed it and like talking about it.
And I can say, just, as someone who sees the downloads every week for episodes, Spy Game had a lot of support. So there's a big audience for that movie, for sure.
Yeah, it has taken care of me for a long time. We, as writers, have our ups and downs with our paycheck, because, you work on a film, you get a nice big chunk of money, but then you work on the film. And so you make money, but your future is kind of guaranteed with that, with the residual. And Spy Game's done quite well for me. That and Sniper, the first film, which they've now made the 9th one. That thing just keeps turning. I think it's like, you got the Harry Potters and the Marvels that have all the franchises, but it's one of those ones that, like, direct sequels, 9 of them is unheard of.
Do you watch them all?
No. I the first few, and then the last one, or maybe the one before, was pretty good. They consult with me when they start them, just kind of with the characters and that sort of thing. I own the characters from the original film. I have that kind of different from other writers, but I always did only original material. I did a lot of adaptations for other people, but my own stuff is originals, and I've always hoping to write my own Star Wars one day, which never did. I've always kept my characters in the world. I take a little less money and keep the rights. So they always have to consult with me, but I'm always like, you guys seem to know what you're doing. Just keep it good. Don't kill them off in a weird way, because I'm, they appear in my books. So
right.
Anyway, yeah. But yeah, so yeah, but Spy Game has it's become something of a bit of a classic. It opened big. The problem was 9/11, and that concerned a lot of people with releasing it, and just jumping into it a little bit. The segment that takes place in Beirut, which was one of the changes that was done to my original script. We can go sort of you guys covered a lot of that, and we can talk about it. But it had been originally about the Marine barracks bombing in Beirut. Mm-hmm. All the operations were actual operations, and that was that. They changed it apropos of nothing, as far as I'm concerned, maybe budget, to the thing with the Egyptian and the arms dealer. They made it smaller. The Marines barrack bombing is a much bigger sequence. But I think that was actually pretty good with the timing, because something like that would have been, I think, too incendiary around 9/11. But it came out at that time, and but it's chugged along all these years. So yeah, I'm pretty pleased with it.
Well, I do want to get into sort of talking about Spy Game and sort of taking it to pieces and figuring out the nuts and bolts of the film.
Yeah.
But I do just want to cast our view back a little bit further than Spy Game and get an idea of what led you to Spy Game. I mean, I was listening to your chat with Chris Carr earlier today on Secrets and Spies podcast. I recommend everyone to check out that interview as well. Wonderful show. And talking about sort of your early days and deciding to become a screenwriter or a novelist, you were going back and forth on that and what you were doing in school. Could you just walk us through sort of the brief of why you chose to go down the path of screenwriting and eventually becoming a novelist and author as well?
I fell into it because I did study novel writing at USC in Southern California under T.C. Boyle, who's an amazing literary giant. And what happened is I decided that I didn't want to write a novel for my thesis, thinking, big fat 400 pages, I got to type, full margins. I'd read a lot of screenplays, and I noticed that, to get it right, it's got to be 120 pages or less, and the margins are real narrow. So I petitioned a master's degree, because it was undergraduate. I petitioned for a master's degree in screenwriting, because they didn't offer one in undergraduate at the time. And I think they just looked, well, he's going to do a master's degree work for an undergraduate degree. We'll let him do it. And I thought I was getting away with something. Turned out I had a proficiency for writing screenplays. And when I sort of went into the work world, I got a job in the publicity department at Walt Disney. And that was still back in the days when the movie poster would go out with the press kit and the little black and white stills, that would be stapled to the marquee. I'm the guy that wrote the caption on the stills, so it would be, Brer Fox and Brer Bear throw Brer Rabbit into the briar patch. Walt Disney, 1956, stamp, and I do that. But I was working for Barry Levinson on a film called Tin Men, and Danny DeVito, Richard Dreyfuss, Barbara Hershey. And my job was all the still photography coming off the set. I'd have to X out the ones with the eyes were closed or someone was looking funny and just send them back. I guess it felt like it was a job a chimp could do. But he sent me a note and said, you've really made my job a lot easier. You have a real good eye for this. And I went out to lunch with him, and he offered me a job as his writing assistant. There's a few little details in between, but so I did that. My first writing in film then was on Good Morning Vietnam. And if you remember the film, there's a teletype that keeps you up to date with what's happening in the war.
Yeah.
And it's some of them are a little bit odd things. And my job was to write all the teletype traffic. So that was my first thing. Then there was a writer's strike, and we were just about to start pre-production on Rain Man, and he wanted to rewrite the entire thing, but he couldn't work because of the strike. So the workaround was he would dictate all the scenes in the dialogue. I'd take dictation, which I had to quickly go and learn how to write shorthand. And then I'd type it all up, and he'd just red pen it. So that's where I really got my screenwriting education, because I'd turn in the pages in the morning. No, this is terrible. Oh, this is pretty good. And in that way, I learned how to write screenplays. So jump ahead a few years. I'd written Sniper. I'd written a whole bunch of Barry Levinson-esque romantic comedies and quirky things, and they didn't like any of them. But they bought Sniper for TriStar Pictures, and it was all ready to go. But the head of TriStar said, "Pull the plugs, put on the brakes." He said, "We don't have Marines in Panama. What? This doesn't make." Well, just give it 6 months. We're going to be in Panama, and I was pressing enough to kind of put the pieces together. We invaded, and then that came out, and that launched my career. I worked with them for another year or two in development, working on some of their films. But once that took off, I decided to just stick with the screenwriting. And opportunity and maybe talent met, and I sort of made a big splash writing 3 very important, not important as in content, but important as the nature of screenwriting in the business, screenplays that consecutively each sold for the highest amount an original screenplay had ever sold for. Competing in there with Joe Esterhaus and Shane Black and stuff. And that really planted my flag. And so I became, and they were action comedies.
Mm-hmm.
That became sort of my calling card. And so for the period of 1991 to 1995, any action comedy out there, the studios would send me the script and say, can you bump this up a bit? So, I get a Lethal Weapon script or a Die Hard 3. I go, you honestly don't need any more action in this thing. It's wall-to-wall action. What's not working is your story's not real good and your character. Stay away from the characters. You're the action guy. Don't touch the character. That kind of annoyed me. So I took about 8 months off, and I decided, I'm going to go to the novel writing. And I wrote Spy Game as a book. And 8 months, I had a kid on the way. Suddenly I needed more money. So I lopped off the ending of the book, the manuscript, and converted it into a screenplay, which is the film that sold. But what happened is no one liked it. The studios were absolutely, they said it's all sitting around a room. The main characters never meet. It's flashbacks and it's narrated. This is never going to work. And of course, if you want to make it into an action comedy, they offered me quite a bit of money. No, not going to do that. And then I said to my agent, look, here's what I'd like to see with this. Since we didn't auction it off for, $1 million or whatever, I think people would like to see one more time Paul Newman and Robert Redford. Mm-hmm. And the roles were written. I'd written that with them in mind. Paul Newman got involved, and he was into it, but it took a while for me to set it up for them. Even with him, Redford wasn't attached yet. It took another year to get Beacon Pictures involved. And by that point, Newman said, you know what, my bio is a little bit fudged. I'm about 5 years older than everyone thinks I am. This is maybe going to be too much for me, but maybe Bob could play the role you envisioned for me, which was a little bit more like Newman in The Verdict. And so that's when Redford got involved, and he jumped at it. He loved it. And so Beacon had envisioned this as a real small scale, intimate, almost indie film with Redford. And so the deal they made is, because they didn't want to pay my fee, which was pretty exorbitant at the time, they said, you can keep all the rights. You can keep the rest of that book. You can keep, all we have is this script, this movie. And if we want to remake the script, we get a sequel. Not necessarily a sequel, but a remake.
Sure.
And so that was the deal we made. And I just put it in a drawer. Right? So I had the world and the characters and all that. And it worked out pretty well, because the promise they made is, we're going to do your script. Well, okay, we're going to do your script. But then the director they got to go with the indie film idea was Mike Van Diem. And he'd come off, he just won the Academy Award for Character for Best Foreign Film, which I liked, a pretty good movie. And then I think the year before he'd won, or maybe two, an Academy Award for Best Short. And I sat down with him. He really thought he was the next Orson Welles. And he came in and lectured me on, I don't know anything about the CIA. I don't know anything about this. I'm a moron and a fool. And I kind of said, yeah. I said, well, how do you know? Well, I read this book. And I'm like, yeah, that's put out by the CIA Office of Publications. Of course you think that's what it is. I grew up knowing a lot of these people. I didn't write the book or the screenplay out of, thin air to make up a good story. I wanted to write about people. They tell you when you, especially studying novel writing, write what you know. Well, I knew a lot of old spies. So anyway, but the guy won the Academy Award. Redford approved him. I stepped back, and then that went 2 years in a direction. I mean, it was two guys in a hotel in Warsaw. They didn't even need the same names because they were different ages. It was all completely different, peeping through a hole at a Russian defector. And there was no flashbacks, no nothing. It was a real intimate two-hander in a hotel room, and none of the plot was there. Well, that didn't work. Obviously, that wasn't going to go anywhere. He went off in a huff, and then they got what's the guy's name who did the rewrite? I can look at the poster.
What, David Arata?
David Arata, yeah. And so they brought him in, and he went back to my script, but developed it in his own way. And he's the one that did the sequence in Lebanon, the opening sequence with the reincarnation pill and the electrocution and stuff. He changed that from the real thing that I'd had in there. There was more of a based on an actual operation. And that scene's pretty good. I like the scene. It's a little hokey, but it certainly has the suspense and engages you in the film right off the bat in a good way. So he made those changes, and then that lingered another year. They got Pitt based on that script, so Brad Pitt came on board there, which was kind of interesting because he had been the original cast in Sniper in the Billy Zane role. But then it went off. He said, "Can you give me 6 months to make a movie with Bob Redford. River Runs Through It, and then we never saw him again. He was a huge star after that. So anyway, then it's all ready to go. And Redford reads it and says, "No, this isn't the script. Where's the script that I wanted to do that Paul had sent me?" So I didn't actually know that was going on. I got a call from Tony Scott, who I'd not met before. I'd worked a few times with Ridley trying to get projects off the ground, nothing that we ever made. So I knew Ridley fairly well, and Tony had my number. He called me, and I said, "Well, Tony, it's great. It's 3 years later. I'm glad you're making the movie. You're going to do a great job. It's great. It's good, perfect for you." He goes, "No, you don't understand. We're throwing all that out, and we're going back to your original script." And so that's how the movie happened. That's how it came together. And it the other thing they changed was Catherine McCormick in the film. Elizabeth Hadley had been Asian. It had been, she'd been Chinese. So the idea that the Chinese wanted her made more sense than she's in Beirut, but the Chinese want a kid. That kind of was all shoehorned in and a little bit didn't make sense. However, she did a great job. The reason behind that, as I learned later, was just box office. They didn't, at the time, didn't believe that an female Asian star could carry a role that anyone wanted to see. Jump forward to the Academy Awards, and certainly Best Actress went to an Asian star. So I think people are just fine with Asians. But at the time, had to be a Caucasian woman for Brad Pitt.
Right.
Now, as I've gone on and written it, I've actually kept her as Elizabeth Hadley. I kind of liked what she did with the role and used that. So that did change my books a little bit, interestingly enough.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. And I think the first thing to do is, because I suppose it wasn't really addressed. You spoke about it again with Chris Carr's interview, but I suppose when you were writing Spy Game, when you came up with the concept of writing Spy Game, what made you want to write a spy film? Of all the films you could write, you've written Cutthroat Island, you've written Sniper by this point. Why a spy movie? What interests you about that sort of area of films?
What interested me was growing that write what you know thing. And I grew up loving James Bond movies. Who doesn't? It was like going on a vacation, around the world every summer. A couple summers, one would come out, like on vacation. But through the context of my own life, there's something that I said on his thing I can't repeat, but I have had contact with people in that in the intelligence business, at family gatherings since I was little, at weddings, that sort of thing. And I'd say as a young Mike, I can tell you this: my grandfather, before the CIA, but his day-to-day job, skipping World War II, was he ultimately was the head of narcotics and intelligence for the state of California. And so there were a lot of interesting people that would show up for Christmas Eve. And if you can imagine, in the 60s and 70s, it'd be the early 70s, I guess, all the men would be out in the what would you call it, the service porch back behind the kitchen where the bar was. Christmas Eve, and the kids and everyone's in front. They're drinking. I go there and listen to their stories. And a lot of these people were spooks of some nature or another, either from the state or from the larger government. And I got to know a lot of them. And then as my life went on, other people of a younger generation were involved, coming as guests to family things, or I'd be invited. I end up meeting these people. And I kind of thought to myself as I set out to write Spy Game, what people don't really know is they're not James Bond. There's a deep patriotism that goes through them. Oftentimes that's equal to being very jaded. There's a lot of divorce, a lot of alcoholism, and then a lot of people that have come through that. So when I wrote it, I didn't really, good plot and a shoot 'em up. I've written a lot of shoot 'em ups and a lot of plots. I didn't really think the plot itself was what was important, but the Cold War itself and who these people are that kind of went through it. And so I based Muir on kind of some of those gentlemen that I knew, all through my life growing up. And then there was one guy who was my PE coach when I, phys ed coach in middle school. And he was a Vietnam vet. And he led a lot of backpacking trips since the 70s. So backpacking and granola were in. And we do the John Muir Trail in the High Sierras out here in California. And we take these 2-week treks, and through the school, we do that. He, you didn't have cell phones or streaming. You couldn't just, the sunsets, you could watch something. There was nothing to watch. The campfire was a big thing, and he'd tell these stories. And with him, he'd bring on these different trips some of his buddies that he knew in Vietnam. And so me and the other young guys that were with us, they were teenagers, some girls, we just listened in rapture to these stories about, his time in Vietnam, which was a little bit off the grid. I didn't think much of it, but I did like the way he was able to spin a yarn, kind of the way Nathan Muir does. And I sort of liked that he was the coolest guy. He was that cool. So what you see Nathan Muir is as far as his attitude and the way he approaches things and tells stories, I was really channeling that coach that I had. Turned out that, later I ran into him many years later, and he said, we reacquainted, and he said, "You wrote Spy Game." He goes, "Spy Game," because that's my all-time favorite movie. And I said, "Yeah, it's about you." He goes, "But how did you know?" I go, "How did I know what?" He goes, "I told everyone that I was, an army, a grunt in the army. How did you know I was in Laos in the CIA?" Were you? I didn't really actually know that. And it turned out that the guy I based it on was really the guy I based it on. I had just put the pieces together subconsciously, I suppose. I have no idea. Because he never said it. But, some of that stuff that he said and it further explored in the books is that guy. And so he is, so it all kind of circled around back to what I did. The other thing is Tom Boyle at university. He'd suggested, he said, when you write, Michael, what you're best at and what you should lean into, because you have a real unique way of doing this, you like to write stories about stories. You all your best writing is about someone telling the story and how that person develops, and we get to know them by the way they tell a story, what details they use, what they leave out, what they use the story to accomplish. And so anyway, I leaned into that, because if that was my strongest writing and I was going to first write a book, that's what I leaned into. So that's kind of how Spy Game became Spy Game. And I really felt that really we hadn't seen a movie about what it is to become a spy, what it is to be a spy, how they look upon each other, and maybe even look at, the earlier version of themselves in the younger spy. I'm always writing that older, younger father-son kind of story, which I'm attracted to, and I seem to have had success writing.
When you are going through the process of writing the screenplay, are you showing some of these contacts you have in your life with spy experience for maybe like input, or is it something where you're just going to kind of write it and then they can see it when it comes out?
No, I always stay in touch with everyone. I'm not someone that holds my cards all that close. I'd never make a good spy. I can't, I don't keep things secret. It always makes it better, even if I go exactly opposite of what they say it is. I need to know what it is so I can make that seem real. One of the things that I've always enjoyed with Spy Game is, after Spy Game, my association with the CIA increased quite a bit, and maybe it had before, and I hadn't really known what was going on. But I've always been, and they've opened their doors to me, especially for my series, The Agency, because I portrayed it correctly, and I portrayed them the way they are. And again, it's the way they are as people. That's what they really, one thing one of them said, I was at headquarters and he was complimenting the movie. He said, every time we show up in a movie, it's the ex-CIA guy that wants to murder someone, or we're assassins. And I was good friends with Tony Mendez, who Argo is about, and his wife. He was chief of disguise, and then she, after he retired, was chief of disguise. There he was. she's still a very close friend of my family friend. We do 4th of July's together. And the one thing he said, and I very early on in our relationship, but it shows up in Spy Game, is we get caught with a gun, we go to prison forever. We get denied and we go to prison. We don't use guns. We don't. We use a pack of cigarettes, a stick of gum. That's what we use. We don't, it's not, and if you think about it, we don't see a lot of trains getting derailed with shootouts and Paris having car chases and machine guns. That really just doesn't really happen. They make great movies. I love all that stuff, but it's not really what espionage is and what spies are. And so they always keep me grounded on that, and still do. But the thing is I do relish the most the compliments or the reviews I'll read online from my books from former CIA officers saying, "Wow, this was it. He wasn't there, but he got it." And that always is the highest compliment when you're writing about something that's real.
One of the things I think your movie does very well is balancing the tradecraft, all the explanation of espionage, with a movie that's just genuinely entertaining. And there's a lot of material out there, say like a Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, that you can say that really captures what it feels like to be a spy. Like John le Carré really understands that.
Yeah.
But that is not going to pull in a massive opening weekend audience. Whereas I think like Spy Game is very good at balancing both of those demands. And I'm just really curious how you pulled that off, because I've seen very few do it.
Well, thank you. It's, I guess, although I was thumbing my nose at it a minute ago, it comes from writing action comedies. It comes from writing real mainstream, plot-driven movie moment stuff. And so I'm able to do that. The thing is, you want to show the tradecraft, but I can't stand training scenes in movies. You watch a Three Musketeers or a Zorro or something, and they're going to train? Let's see the on-the-job training. I want to see on-the-job training. So I tried to do that with Spy Game, make it feel like it was on-the-job training. What makes it work is we know that Muir is already running a con on it, from picking him up off that train and isolation and that whole thing in Germany. So you're already sort of feeling, God, they're growing together really well, but boy, it's all based on a real flimsy, phony setup. The idea. So I think that keeps the suspense alive in that sequence. Tony Scott did a fabulous job with that sequence. The music, sometimes I write music cues in my scripts. I didn't in that one. I liked his music cues because they told us the years. I like the way the camera goes, and he isolated moments. My script was a lot longer, and so his is better. His version is better than mine. But isolated the moments that were the pure tradecraft moments. One thing that you might find amusing is the scene in the bar where he talks about scotch, right? And so the movie comes out and a package arrives at my door. I open it up and it's from Johnny Walker. And it is a presentation box. It says Michael Frost Beckner Spy Game. And it's this whiskey that they don't sell. It is private reserve whiskey from the head. He goes, "You've done more for our business, since Ian Fleming said shaken, not stirred with a vodka martini." And so it was that. But again, that's amusing because of the head nod to, well, all those men in the back porch of my grandmother's drank copious amounts of scotch. Just that was it. No one drank martinis. But it's kind of like that. It's balancing. So you got to put humor into it. You got to move it quickly, and it has to have another meaning behind it, I think, than just now he's going to train. And so that was it's building. I want to build a father-son relationship built on sand, where he was tricked into the whole thing from the very beginning.
My first follow-up question from that is, how did the whiskey taste? Did you get did you ever pop the top?
I did. You know what? Yeah. So it's for a long time it didn't get touched, and then I gotta know what this tastes like. I'll just have a little bit, and it was a blended whiskey. It tasted like a cask draw single malt. So it was astonishing, and then it was pretty much gone in a month. I did very good. figured, what's the point? I mean, this is good whiskey. And so I still got the bottle in the presentation case, but it's empty. And maybe
I was going to ask if you kept it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. For a long time, it looked really nice. But what's the point? It's like a cigar, You get a box of Cuban cigars as a gift or something. You put them in your humidor and never smoke them. What's the point of having them? I don't know. Whiskey's to drink.
Well, you're waiting for a day that's never coming. You might as well enjoy it while you're there.
Right, exactly. And so I did, and it was fabulous. It was really quite good. I was quite into single malt scotches for a long time, and so that did hold me off from it. It was what was it? 40 years aged, blended. It's probably gross. It wasn't gross. It was the very best stuff.
Well earned, I would say. Now, when you're in the process of putting the script together, and obviously you mentioned the Paul Newman and Robert Redford coming in, and eventually Brad Pitt. Before the process of casting even happened, before those names were involved, when you were writing the script, did you envision any actors in the roles that weren't cast?
I never do. I think I've written for a lot of actors, but one thing that was kind of funny, I wrote for Eddie Murphy once. And I tried to get Eddie Murphy. He wanted to do, what really happened is Paramount wanted him to do Beverly Hills Cop, whatever it was with the roller coasters, whichever one that was. He did not want to do it. He wanted to do a Western. I'd been known for writing Westerns and a number of Western scripts that weren't made, but that's how I make my living, is writing, not making movies in the movie business. And so he was, I was known as a guy to do Westerns, brought me in to write this Western comedy for him. And it was going to be pretty good. It was him, and this would be in like 93, him, Whoopi Goldberg, Arsenio Hall. It was right after the one that I think he did with him before. Timothy Dalton, Daniel Stern. It was pretty good. It was kind of like a Magnificent Seven, kind of thing. But they said, write it for Eddie, and which I did. And he hated it. He absolutely hated it. But they did hold him at Paramount long enough while I was writing for him to make that movie. They go, we bought you your Western, now make this. So I held him in place for the studio. So I was a good studio wonk there. But so I try and I don't see who they are at all. I have had some idea that I wanted a Redford Newman thing, but I wasn't. If you write strictly to that, you're going to miss the mark. It had to be something that could be something else. And, I don't know. It's kind of all facets of me in a sense, even when I write women, they're all, it's a facet of my personality that I'm trying to express. I'd always thought, I'd always thought if it wasn't Newman, and Newman was the target. And now I think Brad Pitt, makes the movie as much as Redford, in that you just needed that. It would have made even less. It made quite a bit of money, but it would have made less money if it had been just two old guys. The timing and the timeline is a little hokey in the film. How it's Brad Pitt in Vietnam there, and then he's about the same age after the fall of the Iron Curtain. You don't notice in the movie. You don't notice. I did, but they made it work. But they really were a little bit closer in age. But it was at one point, there was a director attached who was dying to have Gene Hackman play the Redford role, which would have been interesting. Redford is perfect, but that was interesting. But I have to steer away. You do archetypes, but I write that character really well. I've done that kind of character, that aged guy with that set of personal issues and hangups. I've made a living writing that character a lot.
And I'm curious, Robert Redford, amazing storyteller, director in his own right.
Yeah.
When he comes on, does he have suggestions about what he sees as maybe would help the character in any way? How does it evolve with his involvement?
Well, my experience with him was not that close, because the script was pretty much finished. He was more interested in making it a Robert Redford character, who Redford is. So, like I said before, it was more like Paul Newman in The Verdict. So there was a lot more alcohol. he was smoking the whole time. That's why he has a pack of cigarettes in the office with the boss, because he's been smoking the whole damn time, and they keep telling me to put out his cigarettes. He's like, it's my last day. You fire me. So he was worried about that. He was worried about he didn't want. There was much more voiceover. He said, I'm more the strong, silent type, less dialogue for me. So he knows his strengths really, really well. And now, for me, it's like, I don't want to change all that. But it's him now. It's not me anymore. It's with film. It's you got to collaborate. You got to make you have to, and you have to trust that the actor knows that Redford knows what he's doing in every moment. He can do more with his eyes than I can write 6 great lines. I mean, he can just do that with a look, and so that's kind of what his involvement with the script was. But he was always taken by it from the beginning. And it wasn't until it got to production that he decided, I need to cut some of this stuff. This isn't serving the way I'm playing the character. So that was kind of that.
And you mentioned one of the original director, Mike Van Dien, being involved, and then the script kind of got passed off for a while. Did you have much time working with Mike, and did the script go through any sort of evolutions in that time period?
No, they paid me a big chunk of money not to work with Mike.
Right.
The studio paid me a lot of money. Mike again wanted it to be a completely different movie. He felt he was more of an expert on the CIA and Langley, even though he's from Copenhagen or wherever he's from, than I. And so he rewrote it from page one as an entirely different film. And he was very adamant that his film was the best spy script ever written. So when it came down to it, he worked on it for about a year. And they said, well, could you maybe go a little bit back to Beckner's script? No, this is the definitive spy movie. Trust me, it's going to be the greatest one ever made. And having the 2 guys in the hotel room, for the whole length of the movie in a small hotel room is going to be the most drama you've ever seen. No one agreed with him. Sadly, I didn't work with him. He didn't like me. He's quite an auteur, and he had that auteur sensibility that he has carried him on with his career. That's what he wants to do. It didn't work out in Hollywood. He didn't ultimately do it.
And when David Arata is working on a draft himself, are you in communication with him, or are you very hands off when he is working on that?
He did his own thing. We didn't talk at all. You're supposed to, when you rewrite, some writers do it, some don't. You usually call the previous writer. I did the night manager for Sidney Pollack. And the first writer was, Jesus, the name's slipping my tongue, wrote Chinatown, Robert Towne. Towne. So I get hired for that. You're damn well sure I'm going to call Robert Towne and go, what's the story with this thing? That one lingered for a long time, and they ended up making it into television. But some people do that, some don't. He never called me, so it's not really my place to call him. It was sort of, do your own thing, and he did, and he resurrected it. He had his own vision for it, and it took it out. It took it closer to mine and away from the Warsaw hotel room, the Holiday Inn in Warsaw of Mike Van Dien. So he really is, and that kept Redford interested. I think without David Arata, Redford would have just said, forget it, And and so then he came in, and then it came swirled around back to me a couple of years later.
The other major sort of casting coup, which we've briefly spoken about, was Brad Pitt. Now, famously, he was originally going to do Bourne Identity, but turned it down to come and do Spy Game.
Yeah, I didn't know that till I heard your thing. I didn't know that.
Really? That's what the internet says. So
I think that's true. I think it's I think as the years gone on and the Jason Bourne stuff has gotten so big, that story keeps getting repeated, and I think it's a true story. I don't know. While I did work a little bit with Redford, enough to know him and work with him on, because he came on in the beginning.
Yeah.
Pitt came later. He came later, and I think I'd only be guessing though, but I think it's his relationship with Bob. I think they had a good relationship. Brad likes the politics and stuff, and this I think felt a little more real. And he really, when he did talk about it on the press tour, he was much more interested in the Cold War and geopolitics to some extent that I don't think the Jason Bourne stuff had. I mean, that was more of a, it's sort of in between maybe a spy game and a James Bond. It kind of rides the middle there of the spy thriller genre.
Well, Cam and I have spoken about this before, but I don't think Jason Bourne would have had the legacy it's gone on to have had it been with Brad Pitt. I
agree 100%. I think that's I think people underestimate Brad's acting, but his acting is really good. But it is because there's a sensitivity to him, like a softness. Even when he's a tough guy, there's a sweetness to him that I don't think Jason Bourne has. And Matt Damon, even when he's sensitive, you can see violence in his eyes. And what do you look at? What Legends of the Fall? He gets fairly violent in that. And he's but he's sensitive. He's sensitive in that, and I think that's what attracts Brad to that. And I think Matt Damon is I couldn't imagine it, without him actually. Without Matt Damon, he makes those movies.
Yeah, definitely. And you don't even know does Brad Pitt do 4 of them even, like to have an ongoing franchise?
No, right. No, his taste goes in all different directions, and he gets engaged in something, and that's all he's going to do. And it's remarkable that he did all those Ocean's movies, and but I think that's a great group of people who all liked each other, so it was fun to do. It seemed like it.
The behind the scenes seemed like it was an absolute joy to make those movies.
Yeah, it seemed like something I'd like to be part of. Yeah, it looked like a lot of fun.
I had a question about Tony Scott, who's such a visually dynamic filmmaker across, from the beginning of his career right to the end. And when he comes on and he's going through the script and everything, does he have visual ideas he wants to incorporate into the screenplay that excite him?
That's a good question. He sees things in that way. He wants to see a scene. He was very interested in the timing of scenes. And so he wasn't communicating the vision, but I think he was visualizing technically what's it going to take to film? What can I do with the length of this scene? Because he really has a tempo in his movies. And so there was a lot of, I noticed in some of the rewriting, there was a lot of tempo changes that it wasn't about the scene isn't working. It's too short, needs more dialogue, too long because of the story. It just, he wanted things modular, I guess. And so there was some restructuring of that. I think that gets down to why the Arata's whole Beirut sequence stays the way it is. He saw that he could film that. The scene with the Egyptian guy on the beach, I love that scene. I think it's fabulous, but it's shot so flippin' well. And that was the thing he wanted. You don't get that at Green Beach with the Marine barracks, and it's a whole different visual that he didn't really want to do. He liked to keep things intimate, and so it was always trying to draw it down into that. And but no, like some of the stuff, I think that I don't know, I wasn't there, but in Prague when they did the helicopter, no one wanted to do that. He forced that thing. And that is, if people show a clip of the movie, it's the scene with the chair, like the chair off the, you want to keep your cover. You don't go on a roof and you don't throw chairs. It works. It works in the movie. It works real well. And that's the clip everyone likes to play. He knew what he was doing and knew where he could push it. The other stuff, the stuff in East Berlin is, that stayed. That whole sequence from when he comes from Vietnam through that whole sequence was straight from the script, and he knew how he was going to shoot it from the very minute. There was one scene, I don't know if he shot it, he wanted to, but it was Pitt killing Anne Cathcart. There's that never made it anywhere, but that was in the shooting script, and then it was X'd out at the last minute.
Right.
In who knows if it was his choice, if it was length, if it was, I don't know. But otherwise, that whole sequence, he had a real idea for it. And you can see how it moves. It's really wonderful when you look at the page and you look at how he takes all the clunkiness of a script out of a script. That's what Tony Scott does. You don't really notice the interiors, the exteriors, the scenes. It all seems to swirl. He had such a style like that. It's terribly missed. His movies were quite good.
Mm-hmm. Well, we said this when we had Dan Mindell, the cinematographer of the film, on the show, but just how beautiful it is, and even the moments of like sitting in the boardroom, people talking to each other, which can famously in spy films, we've tackled so many of them, it can be just taking the lifeblood out of the film for the 5-10 minutes you get in the exposition. But Spy Game manages to walk the wire and somehow stick the landing as well. I'm using a lot of metaphor here, but it does a very good job of making that boardroom scene and the multiple boardroom scenes very interesting.
Yeah, it's quite a big chunk of the film, and they did a brilliant job. One thing I was kept throughout, there's the CIA spy movie headquarters with all the screens and stuff. That's just not it. When they have a ops center with screens, it's your freaking TV on a bunch of things around your head. It's not dark. It's a lot of paper, a lot of people moving around. It's just not that. And because the script described it all that way, I think another filmmaker would say, yeah, get rid of that. Let's do the Jerry Bruckheimer thing. What is that in Black Hawk Down, where Sam Shepard, he's in his trailer and he's got these monitors. There's no one that has that room. It's silly, but it looks pretty good. Ridley Scott does a nice job with it. But because we didn't do that, I think Tony was up for it, and his crew were really up for making it, still make it visually interesting. There's a couple of sculptures on that set. So the set decorators did a good job in that boardroom. And that's pretty much, they don't have windows like that. I think that one had a set of windows. Those rooms don't really have windows at Langley. But even that, the way that was able to light the room was pretty good. And the way the camera moved among those people is really, if you watch it, it's really technically quite brilliant. And it makes it a lot better than just put the camera in, like we do in television. We put the camera here, we put it there, and that's your CIA conference room, because you can't get into the table and in and out of the table very easily.
It's one of my favorite stories. I'm probably misquoting it from the interview with Dan about Robert Redford noticing there's a lot of paintings of horses in the room and saying,
yes,
we need to get rid of those. Why is there so many horses? And it's such a weird thing to notice, but it's perfect. It's exactly right. There shouldn't be all those horse posters.
No, I don't know where that came from. And there still is a horse sculpture, but that sculpture is kind of neat. That still remained in there. I wasn't on the set for that. That was in England.
No. Well, that's kind of where I wanted to lead my next question, was about your participation once sort of shooting had begun, because we've had quite a few screenwriters on the show now, and some have stayed through and done sort of touch-up rewrites throughout the production until the end when post starts. Were you involved at that point, or had you'd done your changes? They were just shooting it now?
No, I was already working at Paramount on The Night Manager with Sidney Pollack. So that, and then that started, 8 years with Sidney. Which was the best experience of my professional career, was working with him. But no, the problem is in screenwriting, and it's why Ed Sidney actually got me into television. If your screenplay and features is good enough, they don't need you. It's not yours. You gotta launch it. You gotta launch the ship and let the baby go. So there wasn't a lot. They had, I'm so sorry with names, I draw a blank on them. But great guy. Who's the guy that did the he did the Alamo, that Texan guy?
Oh, John Hancock?
John Hancock. John Hancock went out and did some work. He did a lot of that, because you can't, Redford says, I don't want to do this speech. You can't just cross it out and not do it. The guild, you have to have a writer there. So John Hancock was there. And now he and I talked a lot, because he'd call and go, okay, Redford, he's sitting in his trailer smoking, saying he doesn't want to smoke. So I don't know what to do. I'm like, I said, well, take the cigarettes out. Why push that? What do you do? But so he was there for a little bit, and I don't know where he brushed up some stuff. He has a couple of great lines in the film that he did. I thought were good The one about his grandmother's horse, or the horse don't want to shoot a horse. Why would I let you kill a horse? Whatever it was, I liked it quite a bit. That was a John Lee Hancock line. But no, in film, the films that I've done and that I've written on, I not really a lot. With Spy Game, it ended up Tony got back, he did an assembly, and then he called me to watch it a number of times and work with the editing. There was some story stuff that they just for length couldn't put in, so we had to rearrange. He goes, how do I even, if I do it the way it's in the script, it will not make sense. So how do we do it? I go, well, if you put the scene with Brad and Catherine here earlier, front loaded, then you actually don't need the scene you had, you know. And so I spent, I don't know, maybe it was 3 or 4 people, not 3 or 4 whole days, but 3 or 4 different days working with him, getting it finally together. And that was, but again, that was in Burbank.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
Calling all agents. Keeping the lights on at SpyHards HQ ain't cheap. And frankly, nor is feeding the school of attack piranhas. So we need your help.
Roger that, Scott. Only at the SpyHards Patreon can you gain access to exclusive shows like Agents in the Field, which tackles non-spy films starring your favorite spy icons, and The Debrief, where we channel our inner solitaires and predict how the big spy movie news of today will impact tomorrow.
So make like a Treadstone agent and activate your Patreon membership at patreon.com/spyhards today. Cam, tell the people what we have in our sights this week.
Scott, now's a great time to catch up on our May Patreon programming, including reviews of Superman and The Fugitive, plus the latest episode of The Debrief, where we look at the new Mission Impossible trailer and so much more.
But before this message self-destructs, Cam, resume the spy chinks.
Was there a deleted scene that just, like, still sticks with you? Like, I wish we could have kept that in?
Ooh, there was the idea of the party for Redford. There actually is a very awkward scene where he's with some of the other old hands that are all looking at him like we're all next. But the big one was Thailand. There's a whole sequence in Thailand where Muir is sent. It's just before Bishop heads to China. So the flashbacks are catching up with the story, so there was a bunch of those, come to think of it, but he's sent by Harker to Thailand to kill Bishop. And Bishop, the other scene was, there's a whole lot to do with that flag. That flag is the objective correlative, if you go into literary terminology. It's sort of the object that represents all the emotions. Who was it? T.S. Eliot wrote about Shakespeare and did a famous treatise that a lot of highbrow writers use or look for, is the objective correlative. It's the blood in Macbeth. It's the thing that is a thing in itself, but it actually holds all the emotions of the character. So it's like a talisman. That flag had a lot more to do. So the flag exchanges hands between those two guys. Arata put in, or maybe it was Hancock, the flask. Is that wasn't in my original, but the flag changed hands. He uses the flag in Germany to recruit Bishop because it's the flag Bishop's father served under in Korea. And so, this was from the headquarters where your dad died. Here's the flag. And so that's sort of, he's had that flag the whole time. Then in Thailand, Muir's not going to kill him. He just says, you got to get the fuck out of here because you can't come back. We're done. Disappear. Do it. You're finished. And and Bishop throws the flag in his face and says, "This is just a lie. This whole thing is a freaking lie." And then we see that maybe it wasn't a lie, and it's hung in his office. The scene between the two of them, they didn't film it. It left earlier in the scripts. But that's one of my favorite scenes in the script. It now appears in my new book, Muir's Gambit, which is the prequel. It's 48 hours before Spy Game. It's sort of like, why is he going in there to retire anyway? What's the point of that? So but yeah, that one I would have liked to have seen on the screen. That was it was a good moment between the two of them, and you tried to replace my father. You're not my father. You kind of turned me into a killer.
Right.
You've almost segued me completely perfectly into the next topic I want to bring up, which is the books. But I did have a final question about Spy Game proper, which is just a finished product now. And you were talking about how the Spy Game has sort of looked after you over the years. It's been good to you. What's your favorite moment from the film, the finished product? Looking back on it now, what is your favorite moment?
Oh God, that's I don't really know. I think I would just say it's oh boy, it's got to be with Bob in Langley. There's too many of them. I do like the stuff with him and his with Gladys. That stuff's good. I think they played it. The best one is when they get in the elevator and he says, "You got something in your teeth." And the reason it's my favorite is because it's exactly how I envisioned it when I wrote it the very first time in the very first draft. That was seeing my imagination exactly perfect, exactly as I imagined it. So that I quite like. Yeah, and the other one where he's, the other stuff, I like the quiet moments where he's sitting there among the file boxes with that just haunted look in his face of the, what have I done? How do I get out of this? In the long night that we have before the final scene.
Which then leads me on a wonderful assortment of scenes there. But I mentioned the books. Now, you've recently brought out a trilogy, the Aiken trilogy, sort of expanding the world of Spy Game. What made you want to go back and revisit this world?
Well, you know what? As I said, I originally had written it as a book. It was sort of going to be my pivot point. It just took me 30 some years to pivot from Hollywood and expand into novel writing. But when I started, I decided, okay, I'm going to start writing books now. I have comfortably enough that I can do it and fail at it, and none of my 6 kids or my grandson will suffer, or my ex-wives or my current wife. No one will suffer. I can do it. But I thought, you know what? Spy Game's got IP to it. Mm-hmm. And if I'm starting out, why not write something? I have the half a book already ready to go. Why not write something that, that's closer to who I am, rather than just start and create a new world, a new set of characters. And over the years, I've been collecting, through my work, through my other work and other spy stuff I was writing, through the people I'm close with that are in that world, I collected so many different stories and anecdotes. And like I do, I just kind of cobble all these things together. And I always felt that why the hell, the one thing that was missing is the relationship, the real point, the real ending of the film should have been that what Bishop says in that scene in Thailand, if it turns out that you were behind what happened to Elizabeth, next time I see you, I'll kill you. So the whole thing is Muir knows that by saving this guy, he's coming back to kill him. That's what the ending was. They didn't like it, whatever. That's why I decided, the books are going to work that way. So what I did was, Aiken was a larger character in the script. That the only reason he's not is because it would have been, a 3-hour movie. All the other characters and Harry Duncan and all that. But there was a lot of material that was left on the ground. And then there was why is Muir retiring? Well, the first half of that unpublished manuscript was about that. So I took that and, redid that whole first chunk, because it wasn't its own book. It was a preamble to the story that we see in Spy Game. I made that into a book. And so it's 48 hours before the events of Spy Game. And the idea, the format somewhat similar to the film, is a guy named Charlie March, who was Muir's mentor. So he's retired from the CIA, an old dinosaur. He's assassinated. He's murdered. His boat blows up in the Florida Keys. Mm-hmm. And the last thing he says before he dies is he mentions Nathan Muir. So the CIA is very worried that, okay, this guy that's known, he's written the famous autobiography about, being a spy. the FBI is going to get on this. Everyone's getting on this. This guy has too many secrets. He mentioned your name. We got to shut up Nathan Muir. We got to get him to confess to the murder. If he didn't murder him, fake the confession. Get Muir shut up. Lock his secrets away. Lock it all away. We don't want any of the Cold War stuff to come out. So they send Aiken, who's the general counsel. He's in the office of general counsel. As a lawyer, they send him to Muir, who just happens to be at his beach house in Florida. It's a little change from the island house he sells or whatever at the end of the movie. But that was a little different in the way the script was envisioned. Working with those guys now, they're like, God, if you told us all that, we wouldn't have changed so much. I go, don't worry about it. The movie's the movie. It doesn't matter to me. And so he's sent to get Muir's confession, lock him down, and get his retirement. The deal is, no punishment for a crime. We think you killed him. We don't know why. Why would you kill your mentor? And of course, he said, I didn't kill him. And get him to retire. And so it's the fencing between those two. The other twist of that book and why Aiken's important is Aiken was the first guy he recruited before Bishop. Aiken was the starry-eyed guy. And Aiken, he decided, isn't good enough for the field. I want him to be my lawyer at the CIA. That's my guy in the office. And then he goes and gets Tom Bishop. Well, Aiken has harbored a grudge for all these years. Tom Bishop got my ticket to the frickin' show. And so he will go in there sharpening a knife to take out, I'm going to take Muir down. This guy who I looked up to as a father figure really effed me over. So that's that book. It's the prelude. Now, if you read that book, the movie, it changes everything in the movie. Because you have to remember, in the movie, he's lying, right? We see what the lies he's telling. Well, you also have to understand all of what he's telling is a lie. So the stuff that we watch the movie and think is real because it didn't contradict anything that he's, that's moving that plot forward, none of that may be real either. It may have all other meanings and plots. And that's kind of how the movie sits after the book. So the book will change how you watch the movie, guaranteed. It becomes an entirely different beast. And then the next book, that's Muir's Gambit, Bishop's Endgame, follows Bishop. It jumps forward 10 years after Muir's driven away from CIA. He's now an annuitant working recruitment at Princeton. He was a professor, and so he's looking for recruits, and he's teaching mythology. That's his gift. And Bishop he's gone off the reservation, as he tends to do, and he's rogue. No one knows where he is in the killing fields of Kosovo. A little bit pissed off the CIA isn't stopping anything of this ethnic cleansing, so I'm going to try and do it. He's got a hero complex. Mm-hmm. He's there. So it's 10 years later. And then, so we follow events there. It takes us to Malaysia. That one is basically all at once, all of Muir's old networks just go off the grid, vanish all across the globe. No one knows why. He's out at Princeton. He's not talking. Harker is panicked. And then they get a coded message from Malaysia, which is, undergoing some, political, there's an election, it's a civil unrest. And it's a guy no one's heard of. It was a very early Muir, a guy named Dan van Eyck, a Dutch colonial in Malaysia, who says, I know the whole thing. I want to come in because I have the answer to everything, but I'll only come into Tom Bishop. So that's that story. And that coincides with, if you recall, 10 years later, it's 2001. It's where 9/11 was planned. The Al-Qaeda was planned in Malaysia. And as is very weird, they have the whole thing, but the Malaysian Secret Service weren't able to, they photographed a lot of it and videotaped it, but they weren't able to get lips for lip reading. So you knew that they were there. We couldn't read the lips of the guys saying what it is. But so you have sort of the insurgent developing war on terror in Bishop's Endgame, but it's this Malaysia. Then the third one is, and that's Aiken is, unfortunately, in that one, he gets his wish to be put in the field, but he's put in the field to, shit, we unleashed Tom Bishop. Tom Bishop may be the cause of all this. You actually got to go kill him. You got to go kill him. And Aiken knows it. I go there, he's going to kill me. It's just a suicide. So, and then the third book takes Aiken in check follows Aiken more closely, and it deals with Cuba in 2002. And it's Aiken now is having to defect to Cuba, or he's chosen to defect to Cuba because now we have 2 books worth of characters, but one of Muir's other agents, a woman named Nina Estrada, a Cuban who was one of his other networks, she's been kidnapped. Muir's out of the picture at that point. She's been kidnapped, and they've taken her in Cuba. He decides he's in love with her. It's books. Aiken goes and defects to Cuba, gonna trade every secret he has for her life, even though he'll never see her again. At least he says her. So anyway, the 3 books kind of work on a set of themes. The first one, which is a lot, like Spy Game, because it's really about young Muir and his mentor Charlie March, told in this interrogation and present. Right, it's the same framework, right? That's about basically a life of lies. All these people are sanctioned, Muir especially, to lie their entire life. You're sanctioned by your government to lie to everyone. Everything you do is deception. And what a life of deception, especially going through the Cold War, what that does to your own soul, how that eats you up, because some of these lies are pretty awful things you did in the name of policy, expediency, or patriotism. Definitely, that's always the starting point. So it's his journey and Aiken's journey, and realizing that, I was the guy that papered all these operations. I made stuff that was highly illegal, legal. So, maybe Aiken realizes maybe when, 200 people get killed in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I'm the guy that signed it that allowed us to do that. So maybe I'm just as responsible. The second one then goes, okay, these guys that have lived these lives of lies, they then go into, in Bishop's Endgame, I start looking at, well, okay, so you've lived a life of lies, and you're always presenting a false identity. What is your identity? If 90% of your time is being someone else, isn't that who you are? Even if you tell yourself, no, I'm the other guy, you don't ever behave as that other guy. You never get it. And so many of these people get so far off onto that. The ones that I've known, many of them don't. Most of them don't, but some of them do. And they have a lot of issues they have to deal with about identity. And one of them said, I look in the mirror and I think that I was everyone. I was whatever anyone wanted me to be. He used to say we'd sell people whatever their own personal Disneyland was. I was their Disneyland every time. Whatever they wanted, I was that. But I'd get home and I couldn't fast enough rip off the mask to figure out who I was anymore. And so it's dealing with that. And then in the third one, it takes the life of lies and false identity and puts that against information. And it's about I go into the technical side of signals intelligence with the Cuban thing. And it goes into how a life of lies coupled with false identity, how a spy's primary objective, which is stealing information, how the person that gets information impacts that information. So if everything is coming from a dishonest place in stealing intelligence, how pure is actually that intelligence? How do we know? And it's the difference between human intelligence and electronic intelligence. So anyway,
right.
I've been very pleased. I ended up writing them throughout COVID and maybe the next year, right, 2021, and published them all at once. I decided that I was going to go my own way with that and publish them myself. And I've been very happy with how they've done. The reviews have been great. Like I said, it's really, I'll go on Amazon and I'll look at a review and it's someone that I wouldn't know, but hey, I lived this life and this is exactly what it was. And that's pretty gratifying. They've done fairly well and they're quite popular. To kind of brag a little bit, Forward magazine, which is sort of like a Publishers Weekly or Kirkus Reviews, but for independent books, named Muir's Gambit a finalist for Book of the Year for 2022, which usually kind of goes to highbrow literature.
It's awesome.
But it's a genre book as Book of the Year. I thought that was kind of nice. And Best Thrillers, which is a pretty big review site in the thriller space, named Muir's Gambit the 2022 Spy Thriller of the Year. So that was kind of nice, and that's kept the profile up. From there, Beacon, I'm just sorry, Beacon came back to me and said, they've been very great. They said you could use all the stuff in promo and stuff. But now it's turned around, and I think I mentioned before, it's, they're doing it, we're going to develop it as a streaming series. So, and I just finished the last of the scripts on that.
Well, that's literally what I was going to ask her, because first I was going to say I was looking on your website and I noted that there is a novella coming called Kaleidoscope, which is a spy game novella, and there's also a beginning of a new trilogy called Drought.
Yes, that's Kaleidoscope. The first novella is finished, but I got to rewrite it. I realize it takes characters that come up at the end of book 2, and in very primary, it's really Muir's arch nemesis in the CIA. Well, I'll give it away. It's the guy in the room that doesn't say much, who looks like he's from that's Muir's big. Is he from? He's the guy that's sitting there and doesn't say much. He's not named in the film,
right?
Anyway, that's Muir's arch enemy in the CIA, a guy named Silas Kingston, and it takes off and follows the thread of that guy. Now he's kind of a bad guy, an antagonist in the Aiken trilogy. It's him and his family. It's sort of a Sopranos set in the CIA. He's counterintelligence, and that's what he was in the film. And it follows that. I realized I kind of got to wait before I release that, because it's really better if you've been introduced to his character in books.
Sure.
So I just started the research for Drought, which is going to be a trilogy of books on Muir. Aiken is the Aiken trilogy, and they're all narrated by Aiken. These will be narrated, the voice and the writing first person from Muir's point of view. It's kind of fun because literally Drought begins, the opening sentence is him turning the key in his Porsche and driving out of Langley. And so so that takes, I have 10 years in between that moment and Bishop's Endgame, where what the hell was he doing? What was he doing? So it follows that, but it also goes back to his own time before and at the time he recruited Brad Pitt in Vietnam. And it follows Vietnam. The real Nathan Muir was involved in something in Laos. For the CIA, he was involved in something called Operation Popeye. And Operation Popeye was about weather manipulation. And the CIA worked very hard to change the weather in Southeast Asia to flood the rice paddies so they wouldn't have any rice production. And yeah, you can look it up. There's a lot of open source stuff on Popeye now. But what is interesting, they tested a lot of it in Los Angeles. So in 1969, when they did, it created a major weather problem in greater Los Angeles, and a number of people drowned. And it was from the CIA seeding the clouds. It wasn't a real storm. So it's Muir's involvement then in the 60s, but also in that period right after the war. And it's actually about human trafficking, weather and human trafficking. It starts there.
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't pitch it, but if you ever want to write in a dumb Canadian and a dumb British spy in the background of a scene, and have us get blown up, have us get blown up or something. Yeah, really dumb. You'd make my dreams come true.
Well, you'd hurt your other arm, but we'd be fine.
Wow, yeah. I even if you name us differently, I think I'd get the nod and I'd appreciate it. But we did jump over you mentioning sort of the TV option for the first trilogy. So what's happening with that?
Yeah, so what's kind of interesting is Universal doesn't own Spygate. They distributed it. They put in production money, but they don't own it.
Okay.
Beacon Pictures owns it, and I own it. What Universal had was a first right of refusal, and they refused it. A number of times we've tried to reboot it, the film, or remake it, and we pitched the television thing. And they told Beacon, nah, we're going to keep that in the vault. So Beacon turned around to me and said, and now all they had the rights to do anyway is just remake that original script. It would be like Gus Van Sant redoing Psycho.
Sure.
That's all they own. Because I own the characters, Universal couldn't make a sequel to Spy Game without buying my rights, because they can't have them do stuff that doesn't match what I have unless I let them. Which if they want to do that and pay me to do it, go with God and send me a check. I'm happy for that, but they're not. So Beacon said, let's do it as, so the original, Beacon has taken a lot of forms over the years, but they have their library, and the original CFO, I think. No, he was the CEO of Beacon that came in right as I was sort of leaving my association. He's sort of been kind of an angel on my shoulder throughout my career, always sending me, rewrites for actors that I a lot of times have written. It's because I don't write for them. That's the secret. I write me, and they like playing me. But some actors will have a thing, a pet project, something. He's always said stuff, but he's always been my biggest fan. They didn't have to give me and allow me to use anything from the film. Spy Game, they could have probably tried to prevent me from using, but they said, no, go use it. Use Redford, use Pitt, use any imagery. If you want to use clips from the film, use them. We own it. I own it. And I love you. You're great. Well, he read the book. So I did that. He calls me, he said, I just read this book. He goes, we're not going to reboot the movie. We're going to do this. This is freaking great. You should have told me all this stuff before, because the movie, we would have tailored the movie a little closer. Don't worry about that. Yeah, I didn't have it all in my head then anyway. So Muir's Gambit would be the first season. Mm-hmm. Bishop's Endgame a second season, and Aiken and Check probably 2 more seasons. It's rather lengthy. However, what's gotten and I'm glad it's me, the different casting options for Aiken, and you can picture him in the film, and it's a white guy. Well, there's been some interest from a very high level female actress, mm-hmm. who's done a lot of, you know her name, I can't say it, but very big, who said, well, I want to do a Spy Game movie. Can you change Aiken to female? I can't change my books. He's going to stay a guy throughout the books, but certainly. So there's that pilot's out there for casting as a female. Other thing is and as tastes have changed and we've gotten into, everything doesn't have to be white bread, and it kind of looks a little funny if it is. So there's another version that Beacon's looking at where I've written Aiken as African American, and what was really fun about what was fun about the female thing is having, I almost said her name, having a woman interrogating Muir is great. Now we don't know if Bob's going to do it or not. He said, he's wishy-washy. He always wants to see everything, finished, and then he'll make a decision. But having a woman go up against him would be really quite fun, and that script is quite a delight. The thing with the black guy is pretty good too, because the CIA in the 70s is not real hospitable to an African American.
Nope.
And so I didn't have to even change what's in the book. It's just by virtue of race and time, even though it's the 90s when they're talking about it, it gives it another neat subtext. And then there's the version that's straight from the book. But I turned in the last script. It was I've never had to do a job like that where do 3. We want to see 3 and 2. I don't know what they're going to choose, where they're going to go. I don't know if I'd run the show. I'm not sure I really want to be on a set anymore. But certainly it's my show. If I want to do that and stop writing and do that for a while, but I'd be contracted for all the scripts. I think I'd probably hire a writer's room. I'd like to see what other people could do with my book. It'd probably be a lot more fun. But we'll see. It's really just at that germinating thing and deciding what cast they're going to, and then where they set it up. It's not maybe Universal. They're pretty good at Beacon. I'd be like, what, Beacon, Universal's thumb their nose at us. Forget them. Screw them. They're like, keep it in the family. We'll probably do it with Universal, but I don't know.
Well, I mean, that's very exciting. It's interesting that the Spy Game world may be coming back in a slightly evolved form with a different take on Aiken there, which I think will be fascinating to see. And I think you may have booked your next visit on the show as well when that's season 1's on the air and we're at a press thing and you get like 10 minutes with us.
Oh, no. Well, this was great. It was really fun doing this. I liked it was fun listening to your review, because a lot of the stuff you kind of detracted with on the film, I kind of felt the same way. So it was kind of, the one with Chris was really quite enjoyable. I have to listen to the other one because I didn't know that you did did it with the cinematographer. I didn't know that you'd done that.
Right.
Oh, I'll pick that over too. I mean, it does.
Oh,
it
dude.
does make it makes my skin crawl just a little bit to know, like, the writer of something was listening to what I thought about it. Like,
Oh no.
Oh.
No, that's really cool. I once went to. I was invited to Sundance to speak at a writers panel.
sure.
I was the only writer there that didn't do indie films, and I was like the studio guy. And so I was young. I didn't kind of read the room properly. And they got to me and they said, what do you think about studio notes and development hell? You've written a lot of movies and a lot of them haven't been made. You've got I said, well, I got to tell you, when I send out a script as my calling card to get my next job, I don't send out my draft. I send out the one that went through development hell because it's usually better. Well, you could hear a pin drop. And the moderator asked me some question. I said, no, look, if I, this is back in the 90s, I said, if I wanted it to be my words or sacrosanct, I'd write books. But I'm writing for a medium that everyone is involved with. Everyone's idea is good. And by the way, when you get criticism, even if the criticism is wrong on the point they're talking about, something didn't work. Even if you think that they got it totally wrong, they just didn't see it. Well, why didn't they see it then?
Right.
And so I learned that very early on in Hollywood, that notes are a good thing because they want to like it. They want to make it. They've spent a lot of money on it. Something isn't working, and it is your job to listen to the criticism and figure it out. Now, criticism on a movie that's finished, it helps with the next one. So it doesn't matter. And, because it's a medium where I didn't do I certainly didn't pick the costumes. I didn't film it. I didn't do the dialogue polish. I can always just say that wasn't me. That was somebody. The bad part, that I agree, it wasn't me.
The good stuff was Michael. Everything else,
Yeah.
well, I can't let you go just yet. I have a couple of questions. I have to sort of well, there's one question that we ask everyone. The first question I want to ask Michael: looking back on your filmography, aside from Spy Game, is there something that you've worked on that you're particularly proud of that you think maybe didn't get the love it should have got, and people should go and check out?
Well, no, the only thing was there's so many scripts, but I was really all my work and my best scripts have never been made. I was really kind of in a rarefied thing. You see a lot of my stuff in rewrites of things that I don't have credit on. I spent most of my money making things, but I'd sell a lot of originals. If you watch Disney's Hunchback of Notre Dame, the musical, the kids thing,
I love that movie.
Everything where that changes off the book, they bought my live action, which we were going to do with the director who did The Mission. What's his name?
Is it Roland Joffe did that?
Roland Joffe. Roland Joffe was going to do that. Then it was going to be Lars von Trier. And I spent a lot of time in Denmark working on that. Disney had paid more than I've been paid for any other script for my live action version. What I never knew is it was really just to pin it down from the others, because it was a bidding war to get it. Because in those days they didn't release, they didn't tell you what their next animated thing was. If you remember way back in the early 90s, they wouldn't tell you. And so they were close to finishing that movie, but the script wasn't working. So they bought this, and while they were doing that, they were just mining my script. And it's kind of fun watching that, because I would never get a chance to work on an animated film. And I had little kids when that came out. And all the stuff where it strays from the Victor Hugo, those are all my scenes.
Wow.
So that's I'm really, really thrilled when I watch that, because it's really kind of magical seeing that there. The live action with Lars von Trier would have been kind of weird and neat too, but who cares? So that one was pretty great. Deep Blue Sea, I don't have a credit on. I did 9 drafts of that, and a lot of the fun moments in that. I go, that's me. Now here's a good one: Cutthroat Island. So the guys that rewrote Cutthroat Island for Gina, what she did is she pulled. It was Michael Douglas and Gina Davis. She got the rewrite and hired the team of guys. They ended up writing Zorro. Well, they've written a ton of great stuff, but they did Zorro, which was pretty good. But she just changed the 2 characters. So what you see Matthew Modine doing was pretty much the girl character, and she was a guy. She was Michael Douglas. So he politely, when the rewrite came in, said, "Oh, I'm too tired from romancing the stone to I'm going to pass." he was never going to do it and play the girl. And Matthew Modine ended up playing that role. Gina Davis did it. Well, those two writers, all the stuff they threw out has ended up in so many movies. My sequence is so, like in Zorro, there's that great sequence in the mine. That's straight out of Cutthroat Island. It just never was in the movie. So I've had that one. When I first did Cutthroat Island, I was under contract to Disney, and I pitched it because I'd already been working on it. I pitched it as Pirates of the Caribbean, do your ride as a movie. Mm-hmm. Jeffrey Katzenberg said, we are never, ever going to do our theme park with our movies. Or maybe it was Eisner said that. So, which was great because I had a very low price tag on it because I was under contract, but they allowed me to, and I made quite a bit of money selling that script. But the executive who did it and ultimately did the Pirates of the Caribbean, which I love the first one. I watched the third one and I like that too. But the first one was brilliant. But there's a few scenes in that were stripped from the original Cutthroat Island, got stripped and sold for junk all over town. I think those two writers worked on it as well. And so there's a lot of movies I'll see and I'll go, oh, there's some more Cutthroat Island showing up.
We did a lot of coverage on the 1998 Avengers film, which didn't go particularly well at the box office. And, we talked to the writer of that film and how many scenes were pulled out of the original screenplay for that movie and wound up in all sorts of things.
Yeah, it does happen. I'm delighted by it. I always like it. I got paid. I don't really care. I'm the one guy in Hollywood that gets paid first, and it doesn't matter what happens. So I'm always happy. It is kind of fun. I don't know how he reacted, but it is kind of fun seeing him show up in other places and going, I knew that was a good scene. I knew that was good.
I think he seemed amused by it, for sure.
He did.
Yeah, it's kind of fun. I kind of like it. And Sniper was a pretty good one, too. I got to work with, my executive producer was Waylon Green, who wrote The Wild Bunch. And he came on to shepherd because that was my first script, shepherd my final draft on that. And I learned a ton with him and writing that kind of harder action and suspense, and that was rather fun. I'm fond of that movie. That movie nowadays, Spy Game. Most everyone's now seen Spy Game, but it used to be, it didn't matter what I'd worked on. Everyone had seen Sniper, or one of the nine versions. So that was that. I've written great. I wrote a great movie for Harrison Ford. That they never made, which was a terrific film for him. I've really been very blessed. I worked with Wolfgang Peterson on 3 movies we never made, and a couple TV. Well, we did do The Agency. There was another series that we did just before he died he passed away, and that was fun. But I really, in my Hollywood career, had the opportunity to work with a lot of real giants that they're just not like that anymore. And from Barry Levinson on, I really got to work with a lot of those directors, those old directors. I'll watch some of these movies they make and I'll go, God, I guess I was working with, like the Godfather thing they did, the mini series. And it's like, I knew all those people. I go, am I that old? And I'm not 60 yet, but when I started out, all those people were sort of at the end of their careers, and I was selling to all of them. So I worked with a lot of interesting people. Roman Polanski, I didn't work with, but he almost did. We did. I didn't work on the script. I was producing on Les Miserables. Alfonso Cuarón did, and my partner in my company did that one, and that brought us for a while. That was going to be Roman Polanski, and that was quite interesting. He was an interesting guy, and so that's kind of more than my scripts because I've written 100 features and dozens and dozens of pilots. So for me, it's always the writing, and the lucky thing is they always hire me. They like what I do and how I do it. I maybe tend to write stuff that gets people excited on the creative side and makes studios go, this is just too flippin' expensive. We're not doing this.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, the usual question we end with, I feel like it probably needs a secondary question. So this is a double bill final question for you. Firstly, Michael Frost Beckner, what is your favorite spy novel of all time?
Oh, you know what it is? Uh, it's it's a Le Carre book, and there's a couple, but I was so close. I worked on The Night Manager for 5 years, so I was close to that, and it was my favorite, but I worked on it too long. I think he have one called the what's it? I think A Perfect Spy is probably my very favorite of his. That's my favorite spy novel. Um, that one, or The Secret Pilgrim, which is short stories rather. Those are probably my two very favorites, and yeah, I'll stick with that.
Nice.
Part 1, great. And then part 2, and this is the final question now. What is your favorite spy movie of all time?
Ooh. Probably there'd be two, and one would be more an action movie. The one I grew up with that really got me into it all probably was Guns of Navarone, Alistair McLean.
Great.
That I watched with my dad. It would be on TV every year, and since I as long as I can remember, we'd watch that every year. And that really got me interested in the espionage and secret missions and that sort of thing. But probably The Spy Who Came In From the Cold is pretty close to perfect. And then the Smiley's People, the BBC did with Alec Guinness. It's not really a movie; right. It's a zillion hours, but that's awfully brilliant. Those are my favorites.
I think that's the first mention of Guns of Navarone we've had on with our interviews. That's pretty cool.
I think so.
Yeah.
You know what? It's worthwhile. I guess it's probably you can probably watch it this way. They redid it. This is before DVDs, but they released it in the full version in that weird 70 millimeter cinema, the weird one that they could never get on TV or on VHS. So they panned and scanned all of those. So there's a lot of the camera going when they're talking, the camera's panning and scanning right on TV. If you see the movie, it was originally done where the camera's not moving. There's a silence to that movie and a stillness that encapsulates sort of the feeling of that big rock throughout the movie. It's brilliant. I was able to see it at the Cinerama Dome in the original version, and that really it changes the movie. Oh, this isn't as corny as I thought. This is a pretty spectacular. The scene with Gregory Peck and David Niven where they got to shoot the girl. One of my all-time favorite scenes.
I know they just put it out on 4K. I actually need to check out that transfer. See how it holds up.
Yeah. See if they did it. It's a very broad letterbox. It's kind of like Patton, where it's that I think it's not the same camera setup, but it was a weird thing they used maybe 2 or 3 times, then decided we're going to go with a different format. The Patton one is they only used that one time. The Super 70 millimeter. I think maybe Quentin Tarantino pulled it out for his last movie. He used those cameras.
That wouldn't surprise me. He likes a good deep cut spy film. He knows his stuff.
And so.
Well, I all that's left to say is a massive thank you from Cam and I, Michael, for taking the time to talk to us today, to take us through the nuts and bolts of Spy Game. I'm so glad you could take the time to talk to us.
Oh, this was an absolute thrill. I've been looking forward to it for weeks. So thank you. It was really quite fun, and I love your show.
Oh, well, thank you so much, and yes, absolute joy. Thank you.
Fantastic. All right. We'll talk soon.
There you go, folks. That was our chat with Mr. Michael Frost Beckner. Firstly, I want to thank Michael for taking the time once again for speaking to us. What a legend, and what a ton of insight into not only the creation of Spy Game, but sort of his connection to the world of spies. We didn't know any of that stuff going into it. That was fun.
Yeah, no kidding. And I mean, it's also someone who's lived in that world for a long time, obviously having the initial kernel of the idea that became the movie Spy Game, but then in the years since writing novels based in that world. You really got a sense through that interview just how much he has internalized about this world and how much of just the nuts and bolts still stick with him. I mean, this was like a clinic in terms of the process of carrying a screenplay from idea to fruition.
Yeah, we've been very blessed on the show. We were speaking to screenwriters in the past and had this sort of almost like a film school approach. And I think a lot of people, if you're looking at being a screenwriter, this is a good interview to listen to, just to sort of learn the real how the sausage is made when it comes to getting a screenplay made.
Yeah, no kidding. And I mean, I really was interested in hearing him talk about the evolution of this film from when he initially was pitching, it was picked up, and then working through a different director in Mike Van Diem. I thought all that stuff was interesting. We included that information with the backstory when we reviewed the movie on the show. But to actually hear him talk about what was actually the shape of the movie at the time, because I think when I had my notes, I basically said there was battles behind the scenes in terms of like the scale of the movie. And obviously the movie that wound up with Tony Scott, fairly large scale espionage film, whereas you get the sense like there was smaller versions of this. And I loved how he was able to explain exactly what Mike Van Diem was going for, and then also the other credited screenwriter, David Arata, what he was contributing as well.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like Mike Van Diem's idea was not exactly in sync with what Michael wanted, being as it's his idea in the first place. It definitely seems like that would have been a bit of an out there idea of these two guys sitting in a cupboard listening to someone's conversation. I'm pretty sure I've seen a film like that before, but it's not as riveting as Spy Game.
I just kept thinking of All the Old Knives, which was the movie we tackled with Chris Pine and Tendiwe Newton.
I often don't think of that film.
I don't really that much either, but when he was describing that alternate version of Spy Game, I was thinking of just a whole espionage movie basically set at a table.
Yeah, that's true. I suppose from that side of things, like the round the table chit chat that Spy Game does feature, I guess it's just a whole film of that with just two people.
Yeah.
But that really feels like a play to me than a film.
Yeah. I'd be curious to see, like, because it would be a challenge for a filmmaker, right? Like, you know, you think of like a movie, say like Buried, the Ryan Reynolds film in the coffin, and like that movie is really well directed and it makes it feel lively. It doesn't feel like you're trapped in just this one location. So like if you hand two people in a room listening to audio and let Tony Scott convey that in his style, maybe it's really electric.
Maybe. I don't think I would find much excitement in that particular film, but I've been proven wrong in the past frequently, in fact, on this show. I am quite the idiot. So maybe it would be a really great show. Maybe that version is out there someday and may come to fruition. Maybe it's actually on our list and we haven't watched it yet.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I'll say with like Spy Game, I'm very happy with the version we got. I'm not saying I need that early iteration of Spy Game, but when I look at how Tony Scott shoots those boardroom scenes, you know, where it's just guys around a table, he makes it pretty energetic. So I do think he probably could have pulled something off small scale.
I agree. And something I wanted to just bring up, I had 2 points really. Firstly is the original idea of it being a Paul Newman, Robert Redford two-hander.
Yeah.
With Paul Newman playing the Redford part and Redford playing the Brad Pitt part. Obviously, there's an age gap there, but it's very different ages to what we got in the final film. Because Newman still would have been quite up there by the time he did this film.
Yeah, I was actually surprised by that, and also just kind of like scratching my head in terms of that age difference between Robert Redford and Brad Pitt. But I mean, it is, you know, it is kind of a bummer. I would have loved another teaming of Newman and Redford. They were such an iconic pair, and I would have been very happy to see it. But
weren't they in the Sting together?
They were in The Sting, Butch Cassidy, and the Sundance Kid as well. Yeah.
Yeah, there's something off to me about 2001 Robert Redford playing a spry young agent.
And they didn't have the de-aging software in those days either.
No, they did not. And if X-Men 3 is anything to say about it, they definitely didn't have it for quite some time.
But I do wonder if the two of them are more like closely confined to a room or something like that. You have it more of a sense that like Robert Redford's been in the field for a long time, and the relationship is just different.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, trust me, seeing those two together in The Sting is out of the only two films you mentioned is the one I've seen, and they were great together. So I would not say no to seeing them two together. And also, Newman in another spy movie would not be a problem with me.
No, we've only got like, I guess, what, Torn Curtain, The Prize, and then The Macintosh Man. So, you know, none of those three are really like home run, all-time iconic spy classics. So maybe a fourth go would have benefited Paul Newman.
Well, it did give us one of our favorite gifts of all time.
The Macintosh Man, of course, the diving off the boat. Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to make mention of is that little bit of trivia that we dropped in our review last year about Brad Pitt choosing this over Bourne Identity.
Yeah.
And how Michael only heard that through our review and was quite stunned by it, but he believed it to be true. So I quite liked that he was surprised by that, and it is most likely true. I quite like that.
Yeah, that was a fun little bit there. And I mean, I also thought it was just interesting hearing him talk about his novels that he has written. One thing I thought, though, was particularly interesting, though, is just writing that trilogy around the character of Robert Aiken, who is a pretty small role in the movie. And when I was doing my research, that actually really surprised me that he built it around that character. And it just shows you someone who sees the potential for expanding on this world.
Well, it makes complete sense to me in that sense because there was so little about Aiken on the page. It allows the most amount of expansion. There's
Yeah.
no canon to break in a sense. So it allowed him to talk about what he wanted and make up a new story. Whereas, like the lead characters, the Brad Pitt and the Robert Redford chaps, both have some backstory basically fleshed out in the film. But yeah, I love that idea, and obviously in the next trilogy that's coming out, they'll be focusing on Robert Redford's character. So I think great stuff. And also, we learnt that there is potentially a TV show version of these books in the works, and some talk of Robert Redford coming back? Question mark.
Sounds like there's a lot of options on the table, and I think one of the things about Spy Game, it falls right into that type of IP they love to turn into TV shows, where they're memorable movies, but they aren't necessarily like the biggest of biggest blockbusters. It's movies that everyone remembers and enjoyed, but ones that there's plenty of room to expand upon. I think of the movie Limitless with Bradley Cooper, which was turned into a TV show some time back. I think it didn't last a long time, but it was it fell perfectly in that sort of type of movie they love to adapt into a TV show. Something where it has a great concept that you can expand upon, and there's a lot you can do here. And I also think there's a lot of room for creativity and to try different things. I don't think people will be overly precious about it.
Are you saying its run was limited?
Oh, yes. In the case of Limitless, yes.
Yes. And to be fair, it's all to play for. You think there's a lot of these sort of spy shows on at the moment on Netflix, Amazon Prime, Apple TV Plus. You've got Slow Horses. I think Special Agent or something like that just started on Netflix as well. You've got the Jack Ryan show on Amazon Prime. There's a lot of these sort of high caliber spy TV shows out there at the moment. Just don't make it like True Lies.
Yeah, and I mean, the movie Spy Game is a 2-hour story. And to turn that into a TV show, a lot of shows I find can feel really stretched out nowadays. A lot of the seasons that you and I watch, but I actually think there's a lot of room to play with this world. You look at a Robert Aiken trilogy. There are side characters I would be really interested in seeing expanded on a TV show. Go in different directions, different types of missions. What happens when some missions go wrong? I just think there's endless opportunities for things you could do with a Spy Game TV show.
And to be fair, Spy Game does a lot of like time jumping with flashbacks and stuff like that. There's also plenty of scope to flesh out the in-between moments that happened, within the film that we don't see, as well as expanding afterwards. And Spy Game was set slightly in the past for a portion of it. So there's a lot of scope with that TV show. And also there's been a gap of 20 years since the film came out. And now they've also got to fill that gap in too.
Yeah, and one of my quibbles with the movie was that it didn't feel like they were giving enough in terms of the female co-star in that movie, that character and the relationship with Brad Pitt. TV show, you've got far more time. You could really, I think, make that one work even better.
I could definitely see a modern version of this show with the female lead having a more active role in the show and a more fleshed out backstory, because she is kind of left behind in Spy Game, which again was a detriment. I sort of a minus mark I had for it too. But I mean, overall, Cam, is there any other notes you had from the interview?
Well, I will just say on a side note, it was fun to hear a few little details about Cutthroat Island, a movie that I don't know that a lot of people revisit Cutthroat Island these days, but for me at my age, like I just remember how much there was going on in terms of the release of that movie. Like there was so much news written about it. I definitely was watching it. I don't think I saw it in theaters. I saw it the second it hit home video. But like Cutthroat Island was a very noisy movie. And so just to hear him talk about the process, when you look at the number of writing credits on that movie on IMDb, it's pretty significant. And to hear his input on his version and just kind of where it was at the time he was working on it. Very interesting to me.
And I mean, we probably aren't going to put the video out from this interview unless you guys really want to see it and then let us know. But to be fair, right behind Michael the entire time was a poster of Cutthroat Island. So it's still a script, maybe not film, that he holds near and dear to his heart.
I'm sure there's an archive somewhere of all the various drafts of Cutthroat Island, and I'm sure that there is genius there.
Yes, probably more at the Michael stage. So yes, that was our chat with Mr. Michael Frost Beckner. What a start, what a champ, and it's nice to know that he enjoys the show, and we hope you did too. But Cam, the question goes to you, sir. What are we talking about next week?
Yes, we are looking at a pretty notorious movie. I mentioned, a few minutes ago, that Cutthroat Island was a very noisy movie when it came out in 1995. We are going to talk about a movie from the 1980s that also caused a lot of noise. We're going to look at the 1987 espionage comedy Ishtar with Warren Beatty and Dustin Hoffman.
Yes, I don't know anything about this film except that it's about two hacks getting involved in a spy plot, which sounds like us a lot.
It does, actually, yes, very accurate, although we sing a little bit less.
And that's probably for the best, although I haven't seen the film, so maybe they're just as bad as we would be.
Yeah, I guess we'll find out about that.
Yeah, I guess we will. But there you go, folks. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to check out Ishtar and join us next week. If you like what you heard on this interview, please consider leaving us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. And do not forget to follow us discreetly on social media at SpyHards. That's SpyHards on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. But until next week, listeners, Operation Dinner Out is officially a go.